In 1989, Simple Minds are one of the most popular rock bands in the world. Their current tour is attracting huge audiences, and the single Belfast Child and the album Street Fighting Years both reached #1. Now they're classed as a stadium rock act, but it's been a long and fascinating struggle to achieve all they have today. Simple Minds' career dates back to 1977, when punk swept through Britain, and when Jim Kerr and others were playing in Glasgow's first punk band, Johnny and the Self-Abusers.
In 1977, very early, March, April, it became apparent there was a lot of people, young people in Glasgow, excited at this idea things were kind of happening in London, but they weren't happening up here yet. There had been a few bands had toured, the Stranglers had come, and there was an amazing night in the City Hall, and I think the Jam had played, but still in the pubs and clubs in Glasgow, it was just people playing sort of covers versions of Eagles songs and Wishbone Ash and stuff like that. And there was one pub, a famous pub in Glasgow called the Castle, and it was a group of people who used to go there as well. They would sit in the other corner. We had recognised their faces from school, but I didn't really know them. And they were wearing plastic raincoats and sort of Dave Vanian type hairstyles, and it looked pretty exciting. And well, one of them came over one night pretty drunk, a guy called Alan Cairnduff, and he said, "Well, ever heard of Johnny and the Self-Abusers?" And Charlie and I said no, and he said, "Oh, it's this imaginary band." And we're saying what? You know, an imaginary band? And he was like, "Yeah, it's this thing we've got, it's a name, and we're going to make it real. And, you know, you play guitar, I've heard, and you and him have been writing songs. Why don't you come down and see our thing? We've written a few songs." So the next day, the Sunday morning, Charlie Burchill and myself rolled his amp on wheels across about half a mile, a road down to this guy called John Malarkey's house. He opened the door, and we went in. There was sort of microphones. He had no microphone stands. They were taped to the ceiling and hanging down. They seemed amazing sort of characters, and they seemed that they were a lot unto themselves. And they had said, "Yeah, we've approached this guy, the manager of the Castle, and we've been on about him for ages to give this imaginary band a concert, and he's agreed to give a concert to Johnny and the Self-Abusers. All we have to do is form a band now." And it was the most exciting thing that had ever happened to us. We turned up to play, no one had ever heard of us. And there was a queue about a quarter of a mile down the street, which just never happened. It was almost like the legend. The legend was no one had even played a note, and yet you couldn't get in. And when we went on stage to play. I actually had an electric organ at the time, and that was up there. There was girl dancers. It was probably almost a takeoff of the Velvet Underground again, sort of plastic exploding. We had psychedelic lights and the whole thing. People were just going absolutely nuts, jumping on tables, swinging from lights, and people were getting thrown out the doors, and there was just kind of something in the air. It was nothing to do with the music. It was all the attitude. And it was dead apparent that the city had been waiting for this kind of a thing for a long time. It lasted for a summer. It was summer madness in Glasgow in 1977.
The demo of Subway Sex was the last recording by Johnny and the Self-Abusers. They split up in November 1977, but already Jim Kerr, Charlie Burchill and Brian McGee had bigger things in mind. They were joined by Derek Forbes from Glasgow punks The Subs and Michael McNeil, who'd been playing in cabaret bands. Now calling themselves Simple Minds, they recorded their first demos at Savard Studios in Glasgow in May 1978. Cocteau Twins, which was a source of inspiration later for the Cocteau Twins, and soon the word was out, Simple Minds were a band to catch live. Journalist Brian Hogg saw them support Generation X in Edinburgh.
After the gig supporting Generation X, I went backstage to introduce myself to the band and say how much I'd enjoyed it. And I said, "Can I be of any help?" Basically, because I was so enthusiastic. Was there anything I could do? Now, Bruce Findlay, who I had known for many years previously, had been running Zoom Records for the past year and had just signed a marketing and distribution deal with Arista and had issued 3 singles through this new deal. And I knew at that point that he was looking for something which was more permanent than just one-off singles, which had basically been the label before that. So the day after I saw Simple Minds, I phoned him up and said that, I had seen the band. They were fabulous. The audience loved them. They were very committed to what they wanted to do, and they seemed like the ideal band that he should try to become involved with. The following weekend, he went to see them at the Mars Bar in Glasgow, where they'd had a residency, and he was knocked out by the band as well.
There was a queue outside. They'd built a phenomenal reputation. They were getting huge crowds, like 130 people, 150 people. Sounds huge, But they were closing the bar, and the bar was closed every night about 7:30, and people were just locked in for the gig. And I got in, and Simple Minds came on stage, and Jim, looking deadly serious, lights went down. There's this girl sitting there with a switchboard. When I say a switchboard, I mean literally 4 on-off light switches on a board and doing lights. And this guy, Davey Henderson, who I'd met the week before when he came through with Jim Kerr, doing the sound on a sound desk. I mean, it was very pompous in a way for a pub gig. But the lights were great. Just 4 lights. She just worked wonders with the lights, and the revolving blue head on top of one of the speaker cabinets, And I just thought, this is bizarre. This is not like punk rock. This is not, what I expected. And I watched the whole gig, and I was absolutely riveted. The crowd went apeshit. I went apeshit. The band were great, and they were so cool. Derek Forbes, the bass player, was dressed like one of the New York Dolls in a leopard skin suit. I mean, it didn't look right for Glasgow.
The first song that we wrote for Simple Minds was an epic at the time. It's a black anthem called Pleasantly Disturbed, and we really thought, God, we've written one here. This is more the kind of thing, as opposed to these songs that lasted a minute and a half. It was almost like some kind of a mantra, and for the first time we felt, God, this is bigger than us. This tune, this song, the effect of this thing, very, very sort of dramatic, and I'm pretty sure that was the first song that we put together. At the time, we were looking for a name. We were still looking to the likes of the sort of Lou Reed and Iggy Pops and sort of people like that. And there was albums out at the time. Iggy had done The Idiot and so on. And I had just liked that kind of naivety. At this time, all the bands seemed to have a sort of a manifesto before they'd even made a record. The Clash and the Pistols and the pop group, and we just wanted to try and get on with the music first and finally come to whatever manifesto, which I think we probably have 10 years on. Earlier, David Bowie had written a song called Gene Genie, and there was a line in that, he's so simple-minded he can't find his whatever it was. And if it came from anywhere, the name of the band came from that.
Bruce Findlay signed Simple Minds to Zoom Records, and in early '79 they recorded their first album, Life in a Day. The reviews were mixed, but Tony Stewart, then writing for NME, saw the band's potential.
I remember really badgering the album's review editor, which was Angus McKinnon, who went on to Time Out later, to let me write this review. And he agreed to let me write it. And you have these weeks in the music press which are quieter weeks than others, and to be honest, you're struggling looking for lead reviews, and it just happened, I suppose for Simple Minds' good fortune, that was a quiet week, and that's why it got so much space. I thought the cover was really crappy though. Some bloody lake or something, wasn't it? When I first met them, but it wasn't in a sort of a stage situation, it was at the recording studio. And the first time I saw them, I think they wore makeup on stage, and it was particularly, it wasn't strange to see it, but one thing that was strange was that it evoked memories of Genesis. And I remember when I interviewed them, I talked to them about Genesis, because Genesis seemed to be an influence. And one thing that was quite remarkable about the interview that I did with them was that it was kind of not long after punk, and people's attitudes had been changed a great deal by punk, and bands coming along had to be modern, and that is deliberately emphasised as modern. You know, they couldn't admit to liking any English music or sort of so-called dinosaur music. And there were these Scots guys, like really wet behind the ears, admitting to liking Genesis. And then when I went to see them in Birmingham, I remember going backstage, and they didn't particularly have a lot of makeup on, but I remember Jim's mascara had run, and he kind of always seemed to me to be a cross between a sort of rather modest Peter Gabriel and a guy from the 60s called Dave Berry, who did The Crying Game because of the gestures on stage. But I don't think it wasn't outrageous. It was a bit weird to see it, because that kind of thing was a bit, you know, it wasn't the thing to do at the time. But obviously they really wanted to be a goth band, and they were the precursors of goth.
Zoom's parent label, Arista, saw Simple Minds in a different light. They were convinced they had a hit song on their hands, Chelsea Girl.
Chelsea Girl was recorded at Abbey Road. We were mixing the LP. We had attempts at it. We attempted doing Chelsea Girl with the mobile in the farm, and it just didn't have the power or the consistency. It wasn't really consistent. And we did it at Abbey Road in one afternoon, Chelsea Girl. Which is, and the guitar solo in Chelsea Girl is wonderful. We kept saying, if that's life in a day, what's Chelsea Girl going to do? It's going to go straight to number one. And it didn't.
Chelsea Girl failed to reach the top 40, and Jim Kerr quickly became disenchanted with the album Life in a Day.
I still think that perhaps we got to record those records earlier than we should have. I don't know how you get experience without actually doing it, but I would love to have been a wee bit more experienced. But I remember going to Abbey Road, and Derek Forbes, who was, out of all of us, he was always the biggest sort of pop star and the one who would always blow his horn in a great way. But he was going through his phone book, endlessly phoning up people saying I'm actually playing the harpsichord that they used on Sgt. Pepper's and such. Everything was a big deal to us, and it was all very overpowering and funny the way it was. It would actually take the wind out of our sails, and also even gone down to sort of London for the first time and gone into the marble arch offices of Arista Records, you know, and you come down out the sleeper, the train, and you go in, and there's these gold discs. We thought they were real gold. Of Barry Manilow and James Last, and you just feel so insignificant. If you talk about sort of funny things, and they said you're going to make a video for Chelsea Girl, and we said, yeah, we're going to make a video. Kind of, what's a video? And someone said, a video is, it's one of those things, you know, Queen did one for Bohemian Rhapsody. You all stand the back of each other in a line and sing. And we just didn't know what any of that stuff was.
Reel-to-reel cacophony was Simple Minds' second album. They were determined to be more experimental and composed all the songs in the studio. With producer John Leckie, they created one of the most musically controversial LPs of the 80s.
We went to Rockfield to work on this record called Reel-to-Reel, that the only thing we had was sounds and atmospheres. The record company had asked for demo tapes, and they let us go in, and I think couldn't believe what they got back. They got back a record that they had essentially no chance of getting on radio. There was no Chelsea Girl Mark IIs or such. But they did get a record that got much better reviews than the first one did, and a record that was getting accepted in a sort of a specialised level.
One of the many tracks on the album which puzzled listeners was the instrumental Velt.
Velt was us questioning how you write a song and what a song is beyond music. And really, we were writing a film music. We wanted to write a visual music, something where you could close your eyes and see the music, but still make it musical and not into sound effects, although we did use sound effects. Velt was, again, started from a bass line, and then slowly we could hear things going on, like if you put reverb on an instrument, or you put some crazy effect on the bass, out of the effect comes other harmonics, other music, other melodies are heard, that's how that happened.
Bruce and I were shocked the first time we heard Reel to Reel. I hadn't been to any of the recordings. I'd been to a lot of the recordings of the first LP, but I wasn't at any of the recordings for the second LP. So I was really, really surprised when I heard it, quite taken aback, because it was so different to how I expected it. A couple of the tracks they played live, but the majority of it had never been heard out with the band before. And we were a bit unsure to start off with. Played it a few times, talked to the band about it, and gradually the strength of the album came through. And it didn't get terribly good reviews at all from anybody, if I remember rightly. But Paul Morley did list it as one of his favourite albums of that year. And it was at that point that people began to think, well, maybe there's something in Simple Minds after all.
Brian Hogg's reaction to Reel Cacophony typified the response to the album. Simple Minds record company were dismayed at their avant-garde approach, but John Leckie was convinced that at least two songs, Changeling and Premonition, took them in a new direction.
Changeling, all we had when we started there, I don't know if it was Derek's bass riff or Charlie's guitar, we just had the riff, that was the riff, and that's all that we had. We worked out a drum part to go with it, although the drums are all just the same all the way through, and we worked out a middle and an ending. The riff is pretty insistent all through the song, and it's built up with I think there's bass synth, bass guitar, which just provides a real solid thing underneath. At the end, down in the club, is Jim impersonating Iggy Pop. A bit like that.
At the time, there was this club movement happening in London, and although we weren't part of it, we didn't go to clubs or anything, they were playing this song called Changeling, which had a dance beat, a disco beat even, a European sort of disco beat. We were getting reactions there, whereas at the same time, we were getting John Peel raving about the record, getting the Paul Morleys of the world, and so coming round. So all that sort of, heavyweight profile, the real profile, the kind of profile that we had hoped for was coming too, because we had never thought about selling records anyway. And most of our idols didn't sell records. From Patti Smith to Lou Reed, Iggy Pop, John Cale, Kraftwerk, you name it. And it was like, perhaps if you stick in long enough, something will happen. But the actual idea of selling records or trying to make records to sell, we never even sort of considered, because we also thought if we did, we would get it dramatically wrong and lose out both ways. So I think we were just beginning to find our feet with that record.
In 1980, Simple Minds reached a crisis of confidence in their career. They were building a big live following and a new musical direction, but were failing to sell records. Despite worsening relationships with record company staff, they recorded their third album, Empires and Dance, with continued enthusiasm.
The months leading up to the recording and writing of Empires and Dance was the first time we really got to travel in the band sense of things. This was a chance to go through Europe, a different period, a different stage in our lives. It was almost like a voyeuristic thing, just kind of travelling right through these big roads, the Autobahn, and right through Germany and France, Italy. And there was a lot of sort of peculiar things happening at the time as well. This was the year before in Britain we had Toxteth and Brixton and other riots. There was a definite unsettling. We were already anticipating that, because where we were in Europe, there was a lot of events, not that we were coming face to face with, but there was a whole Bader Meinhof thing in Germany. There was a whole racist thing was raising its head in France. So subsequently what came, I think, was music that was like a travelogue, both in soundscapes and lyrically. The songs were like postcards from wherever we had been. All these thoughts came out in the music.
John Leckie was particularly proud of the album.
What we'd attempted to do with reel-to-reel cacophony, we'd actually achieved with Empires and Dance. We'd sort of, we created this heavy dance music which had this incessant beat and incredible sounds over the top, which each song on there, each piece of music took you to a different place. It just had so many different dimensions to it, and emotion.
After releasing 3 critically acclaimed albums, Simple Minds and their record company parted in 1980. At this point, they were deep in debt, and even their relationship with manager Bruce Findlay had turned sour.
It was really hard for us to keep our temper, to keep our patience. And we were blaming the record company, we were even blaming our publishing company, we were blaming the promoters. And then at one point during this tour, I think it was in York or Sheffield, it was in Yorkshire anyway, the band began to squabble amongst themselves. I was with them. And because the pressure gets to you and you begin to crack. And I remember there was an argument between Derek Forbes and Brian McGee. And 2 minutes later, where was Brian? We were about to go to the gig and he'd disappeared. And we couldn't find him, he'd checked out the hotel. And I went running down to the railway station. And there was Brian about to get on the Glasgow train. And I pulled him off and pulled him back. And he was really upset. I felt for the guy, but he was a wee bit over-emotional as well. Pulled him back and we did the gig. And we got in the car afterwards, the minibus, and we were driving to the next gig. Very quiet. I mean, definitely, we'd reached a low ebb. This is towards the end of 1980. And I said, this is ridiculous. God, we've blamed everyone under the sun. Now you're beginning to blame each other. And the only person you've not blamed, and after all, I'm meant to be pulling it all together, is me. You know, maybe I'm beginning to have doubts. I don't know what to do now. I'm really getting frustrated. And that was it. The tour went on. End of tour. 3-4 weeks later, Jim said, look, can we have a meeting? Phone me up. He said, can I have a meeting in your office? And I always know when it's like that, it's kind of serious. You know, so they came through. The whole lot of the band came in, long faces. We sat down, we exchanged pleasantries, and then I think Jim that plucked up the courage and said, Bruce, actually what we've come through for is we'd like to sack you. We'd like you to go. I went, what? But this time I'd restored my confidence. You know, I was shaken as well because of the feelings that were going down. So for about 2 or 3 hours, my partner, Robert White, said, look, Bruce, why don't you go out the office? I want to talk to them in the morning. He said, come on, give me one good reason for sacking Bruce, to each one of them. And they all went, oh, this is stupid, Robert. And they felt a bit sorry for me, I think. I think I appealed to their emotions. And I think they felt sorry for me. And they kept me on, which is the wrong reason to keep me on. But I don't care why they kept me on, but they kept me on. You know, it was a real heavy moment in time. But it was only the one moment only where we've come close to splitting up. And it wasn't over a fight or anything. It was over our one moment where we all began to maybe lose a wee bit of confidence.
But to Jim Kerr's relief, unexpected help was at hand.
Peter Gabriel had just done his 3rd album, an incredible piece of work, and was about to do a huge European tour. And we got the chance to open up for him and for the first time play in the big arenas from the tip of Scandinavia right down to the southern tip of Portugal. One thing he did show was it was, very possible to not only to top the bill and be in Europe at the time. He was a very big star, but to be able to have a lot of dignity and class and have a rapport with everyone else involved with the show. We would turn up, and if he was late, he would let us even sound check first, which is the total opposite way around, where the main band gets everything and the B band gets absolutely nothing.
Sweatin' Bullet was one of the many highlights of Simple Minds' first release on Virgin Records, a 2-record set entitled Sons and Fascination, Sister Feelings Call. Managing director Simon Draper had insisted on a new producer, Steve Hillage. Hillage had been the guitar player in Gong, but to everyone's surprise, his partnership with Simple Minds was very creative.
I was aware of how people might regard it, although this hippie thing has always been a sort of some aggravation to me, because I've always regarded myself as an individual. I've never been part of any particular clan or type. I mean, at the time, Simple Minds were sort of described as futurists in the paper, and they used to regard that as something ridiculous. In fact, in terms of sort of general lifestyle and sort of attitude, we were very similar. in many respects. I think I was just a few years older than them. That was about the only difference. And I was English and they were Scottish. One area where we struck a chord very early on is I'd always had an interest in some of the German groups, some of the more obscure German groups who are like splinters from the original Kraftwerk. Like there's this group Neu and another group called La Dusseldorf. And then there's a thing by the guitarist of Neu, it's called Michael Rother. And they were very interested in that sort of music as well. It's what originally was described as kraut rock many, many years ago. In fact, Virgin Records originally made their name as a mail order company selling this so-called kraut rock. And anyway, we found we had a shared liking for this.
Jim Kerr still regards Steve Hillage as one of the best producers he's worked with.
The American, man, it just sounded great. And it was a great single, you know, that sort of guitar intro and the drums and the whole thing sounded really, really good. We were dead proud of it and couldn't wait to get back from America and begin work on new things. It has a real sweep to it and that real drive and the chorus. It just sounded really... Yeah, he really got it at the time. He got the band sounding like it was a new phase and it was a new record label. The beginning of the whole Sons and Fascination period. It was spring and I think he caught it.
Simple Minds had come a long way between 1977 and 1981. For the moment, their troubles were over and their manager Bruce Findlay was convinced they would soon have an international hit.
Love Song was a hit in Canada. And during our Sons and Fascination tour, we got to Canada. By the time we hit the East Coast, by the time we got to the West Coast, we were in the top 20. So it went to number 18 or something in their national chart. And we had our first hit record that we could actually say this is a hit. We then went on to Australia. We had sold 900 albums in total on the 3 previous albums added up together in Australia when we hit Australia. By the time we left Australia, we were like superstars. It was amazing. We were there for 5 or 6 weeks. And we had a fantastic tour. And we left Australia with the record selling so well, it was going to go gold.
Between 1979 and 1981, Simple Minds released 8 singles and 4 albums. But although they'd built a big live following, they'd yet to hit the UK top 10. In 82, with 3 different percussionists, including Mel Gaynor, the others recorded Simple Minds' 5th album, New Gold Dream. It was acclaimed as their best work yet, reached number 3 and stayed in the album charts for 37 weeks. Jim Kerr remembers the period with great affection.
New Gold Dream, of all our albums, it's the album that to people talk in the most almost sort of a glowing terms, a romantic terms. It seems for a lot of people that album put that time in a nutshell in terms of pop. There was a lot of other things out at the time, Associates, ABC and such. But New Gold Dream was a pop album that seemed to have this kind of mystery to it as well. I think it seemed our first very complete record from the first track right through to the last track. You could put it on and the room would become filled with this really beautiful sound. I'd seen the music before New Gold Dream as like equivalent to the sort of feeling when there was about to be a thunderstorm or something, and it's very intense and ions are gone crazy and you don't know what's what. And then when the storm goes, there's this, clearing and the air is good and there's a whole new light. I was looking forward to the future and looking forward to the years ahead and the challenges that they were, whatever they were going to present. And I think all these sort of feelings came out in the songs. The title had the years after it because it was a record that was definitely looking forward.
Someone Somewhere in Summertime is one of 3 top 40 hits from New Gold Dream, but the first single to be lifted from the album was Promised You a Miracle. John Webster, general manager of Virgin Records, knew it was an important breakthrough.
Promised You a Miracle reached number 9 in 1982, which was obviously their highest charting single at that time. That was the thing that finally cracked it, that they, instead of becoming just perhaps a cult group with a cult following who had a strong Scottish base, that was the record that got them on top of the pops, that basically broadened their base enormously all over the country, that woke them up from being someone who's on the pages of the music press to a much wider audience.
Simple Minds spent much of 82 and 83 on the road, and their only musical competition appeared to be U2 and Eka and the Bunnymen, with whom they shared a healthy rivalry. Their next album, Sparkle in the Rain, produced by Steve Lillywhite, was a new departure, which became Simple Minds' first UK #1.
Sparkle in the Rain still had elements of New Gold Dream in it, and probably summed up by titles like Book of Brilliant Things, and it was a much more fragmented record, and the production as well was very fragmented, very loud and crashing, very choppy, unlike New Gold Dream, which you could have put on from one track right through to the end, and it would have been, if you were being harsh, you could say it was oral wallpaper or a perfect sort of coffee table album. But Sparkle was full of bangs and crashes and tumbling drums, which was perhaps the way things were within the camp at that time. It was like, where do we go from here?
I bumped into Jim, I think, at the Townhouse Studios in London when they were doing New Gold Dream, and just chatted a little bit. I think they were aware of me and I was aware of them, and it was sort of mentioned between us that, you know, at some point we'd work together. Now this happens a lot with artists and producers, and it never actually comes to fruition, but before they called me up, I was contracted to work with a Canadian band called Rush, and I got this call from Bruce Findlay saying, would I like to do the new Simple Minds record, which coincided directly with my time producing Rush. And I, of course, jumped at the chance because, you know, one of my favourite groups, and I really like New Gold Dream as an LP. So I had to call up Rush and cancel them, which was not a very nice thing to do because I was really, you know, I almost signed the contract. The studio was booked and everything. But I'm really glad that I did.
Street Hassle was the first song we covered on vinyl. And boy, was it a task, because Street Hassle, Lou Reed's version, it's a opera almost. And there is 3 parts to it. I think we picked the most optimistic part, which is more in the nature of ourselves. It's funny, McNeil just started to play it one day in a sound check. We felt it was too good to be a secret, but it was a task. It was a bit of a mad thing to do, really. But I think that's good.
Lou Reed's Street Hassle was the only cover version on Sparkle in the Rain. One of the other highlights of the album was Waterfront, a song about Glasgow.
One early summer evening in Glasgow, I was walking down by the waterfront on the River Clyde, walking along essentially what is the ruins and the ghost towns of what was the shipyards, which people always said was the main industry in Glasgow, and therefore when they had closed down, you know, the city had also closed down because that was the lifeblood. And I was walking along there, you know, thinking about that, dwelling on the past and trying to imagine what it was like in its heyday and what it was like. My grandfather worked there, my uncles worked there, and there was definitely a sort of melancholy was sort of setting in, because it must have been a real hubbub of activity in those days, and the ships and the Clyde and the whole thing. And looking around, it looked a bit of a graveyard. In fact, it was even haunting walking along the cobbled streets there, and you could hear, and amongst the shells of the factories, you could hear your own footsteps echoing, and those old industries may have gone, but the river's never as clean as it's been for years, and the salmon's actually back, which I find fantastic, kind of a symbol, you know, and it's this thing of a timelessness, or the kind of circle coming back. To me, the lines in it is 1,000,000 years from today, and the fact that things go round and this is just a period in time. We play it live, it feels like, you know, standing on the sort of deck of a huge ocean liner or something. It has that kind of pulse beat, or being in the engine room of an ocean liner or something. That's what I would imagine it feels like. Pretty abstract way to describe it, I suppose. People are thinking that I'm not, but it's just got that classic pulse and chord thing, and then Mel Gaynor comes in. He doesn't half make his presence felt on that song, and Lillywhite really highlighted that.
Riding high on the success of Sparkle in the Rain, Simple Minds set out on a sell-out UK tour. But for the band and manager Bruce Findlay, it created a dilemma.
The band were reaching the arena status by that time. Now, that was the last time we did concert halls where we ought to have been doing arenas. And I mean in vulgar terms again. But we didn't want to move into arenas. Someone has always wanted to reach the biggest audience possible. We're not ashamed of going for the stadiums. Equally, we were aware of how our fans felt and how we were growing. And we didn't think we were quite ready for the Cup final yet. And so what we ended up doing was 8 nights at Hammersmith Odeon. It was like going to the office. It was the biggest bore, the biggest 2-week bore of the band's life. In fact, we were being a bit false in a way. We didn't want to move into Wembley Arena, where we could have done 3 nights at Wembley Arena or something, because that's the big statement. No, we care about our fans. And that's when you realise you're becoming pretentious and phony and patronising your audience. It was ridiculous. To do 8 nights in one town, it's not a big achievement. 8 nights, God almighty, get me out of here,
And indeed, it wasn't long before they were playing arenas. The song which took them there, Don't You Forget About Me, became the worldwide summer hit of 1985.
The story of Don't You Forget About Me, as far as I can remember, happened when we were at the end of our American tour, the tour to promote Sparkle in the Rain. And we were playing, I think it was 3 nights in Hollywood, in the Palladium Theatre. The dates were completely sold out, packed out. And in one of the nights at the Hollywood gigs, this guy appeared in the dressing room. I didn't speak to him myself. I just saw him out the corner of my eye. Wasn't until a few days later, Charlie and Mick had said, this, balloon came into the dressing room last night and gave us this tape. And he said he produced Billy Idol and everything. And we were like, so what? And I never even heard the tape. There was, however, one guy in A&M called Jordan Harris, A&R guy, who I had a lot of respect for, and he said, horrible thing happened. This guy turned up in your dressing room, Keith Forsey. He thought you knew about him coming. I was meant to be there to introduce you. I wasn't there, and I can understand you feeling that the whole thing was handled wrong. However, this guy, Keith Forsey, is a very talented guy. We're working with him just now on the soundtrack to a movie called Breakfast Club, American teenage movie. A movie that's going to have a soundtrack that's going to have a lot of big names. And I think at the time I remember they were mentioning David Bowie and Tina Turner, names that were much bigger than us, obviously. And basically, how did we feel about working on a track with this guy for the movie? And he assured us that he was a mental fan of the band and knew the band inside out and such. And this guy turned up. It was apparent he really was a good guy. And we respond best to enthusiasm, and boy was he enthusiastic. He seemed to know every album we had done and bootlegs and the whole thing, and we thought, let's give it a go. And I thought, well, I could write words that were more apt, but I tried that and it didn't seem to work, and we invented a new start for it, and we came up with the La La Las, which is hardly a literary masterpiece. It took about 2 days to do, even less. Seemed effortless. We never expected to hear anything else again. Little did we know that the hand of fate was going to put it at #1 in America and in a lot of other countries around the world.
Finally they recorded it and everyone loved it. Look, it's going to be the first single. Oh, well, I don't know about that, said the band. Look, it better not come out in Britain and Europe. It'll just ruin our reputation. I mean, look, we've done a soundtrack song. It's great. If it helps us in America, fair enough. But we're not going to compromise ourselves. So we agreed, single in America. Look, the band, they'd like you to make a video. Oh, for God's sake, Bruce, come on. We thought this was just going to be a one wee song on a soundtrack. What's happening? It's a single, video. And so it gradually built up. That came out, #1 smash in America. Please can we release it in Europe? Bruce, we told you it's not coming out in Europe. But all the faxes began to come through from all the European countries because the imports began to come in and selling thousands. And everyone was pleading with us, praying with us to do it. And I think it was Beckenbauer, the football player, who in an article said, before I go out to play, what inspires you, France? He said, listening to Simple Minds before I go out onto the pitch. And when I hear that song, Don't You Forget About Me, I just think this is wonderful. And I told Jim this story and Jim said, okay, you can release it in Europe. And that's how the record came out in Europe.
I remember being in France on my own when I got the call saying that it was #1, and I didn't know anybody to celebrate with. I was just there and I couldn't speak French and no one knew me, and I just went into a bar and kind of started bugging people. Hey, I'm in this band and we're #1 in America. They were like, sure, get this guy out of here, who is he? But it was that kind of a thing. I think they were calling me Elvis.
But Jim Kerr's anonymity didn't last long, despite Simple Minds' refusal to include Don't You on their multi-million selling album Once Upon a Time. It was their most obvious rock album to date, and critics accused them of being pompous stadium rockers and U2 copyists. Tony Stewart, editor of Sounds, disagrees.
Once Upon a Time was an absolutely incredible album. I thought it was a really good rock album, one of the best rock albums that had been put out. And I thought at that time Simple Minds were unfairly criticised for being this kind of a sub-U2 stadium band, you know, the band that wanted to be U2 but never were. I think I've always regarded Simple Minds to have had a separate generic development to U2. And I can see the comparisons and why the comparisons exist, but I think that's really not entirely fair.
Once Upon a Time signalled the start of a new era for Simple Minds. Jim Kerr had married Chrissie Hynde, bassist Derek Forbes had left the band, and they put their name to a new cause, Amnesty International, where they approached fundraising officer Alison Sanderson.
Their involvement with Amnesty came in 1985. Jim Kerr had a particular desire to help the kind of people we work for. And he approached Amnesty with his agent Ian Flux of Wasted Talent, and they requested that they be able to support us. Now they started supporting us by dedicating a world tour they were doing at the time, which was late 1985 throughout half of 1986, and they dedicated that world tour to us. In particular, they dedicated certain songs on stage to us. They also donated proceeds from a couple of those concerts to various sections of Amnesty. They are very genuine supporters, and they have always been very helpful to us.
Simple Minds publicised Amnesty on the cover of the single Ghost Dancing.
Once Upon a Time was kind of slated as being an out-and-out stadium rock album, and yet you get a beautiful, sensitive song like All the Things She Said. And as it happens, I heard that on the radio very recently. First time I'd heard it in a long time, and I thought that was really good. I didn't know it was like that and had that kind of a sentiment. But I remember reading this interview with the wife of Lech Walesa, and it came from a interview done by this lady at the time he was being some sort of internment. And she was just saying this amazing, sort of courageous, strong stuff. And I think some of the lines came from that. That isn't what the song's about, but that was a sort of spark.
Between 85 and 87, Simple Minds toured the world, played at Live Aid, and released the highly successful double album Live in the City of Light. In 1988, they made just one live appearance at the concert for Nelson Mandela in London.
Jerry Dammers got in touch with us, and the first kind of seeds of the idea for this concert, what seemed particularly attractive was that he'd said, we're going to get a handful of bands, we're going to ask them to get a few special guests, but above all, we're going to ask them all to write a song, especially about Mandela. Or it seemed everyone was going to try and offer something more than just a token appearance that day. They were going to come up with a song that would live on. That really appealed to me, and we'd hoped that we could write a song, but it seemed a rather tall order, you know. How do you go about writing a song like that, you know? Do you write something anthemic? Do you write something bombastic or dramatic or whatever? Mick began the thing with a drum pattern, almost like a heartbeat. I was laughing, I said it reminded me of the rhythm of Ruby, Don't Take Your Love to Town. And then Charlie came in with these chords, very free-flowing chords, and you know, the lyrics are so simple. Took us about 30 minutes once we got a start to get the thing complete.
One of the highlights of the Mandela concert was Simple Minds' appearance with Peter Gabriel singing Biko.
Someone asked me, why did you record Biko? And I say it's in the song because of Biko, because of Stephen Biko, and to carry on the name. It goes without saying that it's a fantastic song. It goes without saying that Peter Gabriel had already done a great job both in writing and recording that piece. But when we did the Mandela concert, Gabriel played with us on stage, and it was a thrill for us first and foremost. He was a wee bit naughty in as much he didn't come to rehearsals, which we found a wee bit unprofessional, Peter. However, so I had to do my best at the rehearsal, And although it's obviously a very serious song and sensitive song, probably sounds strange for me to say it was fun to take on a song like that and try and honour and do it with a wee bit of integrity, and also to offer some more heart into it.
I was quite nervous because I've never really done that, gone on with another band. But, with on the Mandela concert, they'd really worked hard in the rehearsals, and my nervousness, which is sort of a combination of natural stage fright and going on with musicians that I hadn't worked with. We hadn't rehearsed the song at all, and there we were playing it in front of the world. So, together. So I was very anxious about that, but once I got out there, they seemed completely assured in what they were doing, and it was a good feeling.
Biko is one of the tracks on Simple Minds' 1989 album Street Fighting Years. Throughout their career, they've remained outspoken and determined to follow their own path. Simple Minds' beliefs were rewarded when Belfast Child hit #1 all over Europe.
In November of 1987, we had met up with Stephen Lipson and Trevor Horn, and we were in the studio, and they were talking about the surroundings, being in Lough Erne, and quite sort of jokingly said this looks a perfect place to record a folk album, and asked if we had thought about trying a folk song, which was quite ironic because after years of Michael McNeil almost bankrupting us by collecting every, modern keyboard gadget under the sun, he was sitting playing his accordion, which is the instrument he first began playing when he was a wee boy. And it was Trevor who had mentioned this song. He said, "You know this song, She Moved Through the Fair?" I had never heard it, to my knowledge. I didn't recall hearing it, but John Giblin said, yeah, he knew it, and so on. Well, nothing happened for a few weeks. And then, unfortunately, there was the Enniskillen bombing, and like most people, I was absolutely sick and gutted. This kind of thing been going on for 25 years, longer, but it got to me particularly, this event. And when I was travelling up to Lough Erne that week, I was reading about it on the plane, and just the images and the horror and such. However, these things sink in, and a few days later, I came into the room one night, and John Giblin was playing this absolutely bewitching melody on the piano. It was, spellbinding. And I immediately picked up pen and paper. It had a Celtic spirit to it, and made me think of the images I'd been thinking about the past few days. And rather than documenting them, I was thinking about the future of Belfast, and kids even been born that night, and what the future was going to bring them. And pretty soon I had a dozen lines. He just kept playing. He played for maybe 20, 25 minutes. And it's quite funny at the end when he stopped playing, I said, "Oh, that's really a beautiful piece. When did you write that?" He sort of rather calmly said, "Well, I wrote that about 150 years ago."
In the second week of the release, when the 7-inch single had come out, it was very close at the top of the chart. We get an indication every week from Gallup how the charts are going, and Simple Minds were #1, and Michael Ball was #2, and was very close. And we'd been trying to get a box set out, the box set featuring photos from the video shoot. Normally these things take 6 weeks. We got the box made in 3 days, but the boxes came in flat, were unassembled, and they needed to be out to the sales force for Saturday morning to be in sale in the shop to give us that edge to hopefully take us to #1. The entire company spent all Friday afternoon putting 3,000 box sets together. Simple Minds rang up in the middle of the afternoon and said, "What in hell is happening down there? It's just manic. What is going on?" Because no one was answering any phones, but the place just stopped. No one did any work. All they did, they didn't have to do it. No one was told to do it. They were, "Would you like to help? Would you like to help us to get to #1? And of course, on Sunday when we did get there, the whole place just went mad. As promised, as a result of us getting to #1, the drink flowed fairly freely on the Monday night.
It's interesting that whenever there's a military coup or something in some of the countries that go on, usually the first people to take away are the artists, because the artists through the years have always managed to document the feeling in the air, the true feeling of the people. That was typified in the case of Victor Jara, who, Street Fighting Years, a title song from our album, is dedicated to. He essentially was a poet first and foremost, and a songwriter and a recording artist in Chile, mid-70s, who paid a high price for documenting the times he lived in. He was a protest singer and a hero of young people. As a result, when the regime came in, they took him away with a lot of other people. They took him into a stadium with a lot of political prisoners. He was a guitar player. They broke his hands, put him on stage and made him play the guitar in front of, absolutely tried to break him and sort of humiliate him. And he was found the next day outside the stadium in Chile with a bullet in his head. Victor Jara talks about you can cage, the singer. You can kill the singer, but you can't kill the song. And you can't kill the spirit. And to this day, the youth in Chile go to Victor Jara's grave and they swear on it not to let his death be in vain. So we dedicated the song, the title track of our album, to Victor Jara in hope that people will see his name and go out and find out not only about him but about other people like him around the world. It's amazing what happens if you really believe in something and give it your best shot. There's one song where I say anything is possible. I don't know if that's true, but I think it is remarkable what is possible if you really believe in something and go into it with that depth. A lot of people say to me, "Oh Jim, I want to start a band and such, and how do I do it? Do I do this and I do that?" And I find myself saying, if you're asking me how to start a band, pal, I'm afraid you're not going to get anywhere, because I was running and I landed, and this is where I've ended up. If you really want to get in a band, do it your own way.